If you are making any or all these production mistakes, you gotta fix them, like right now. Let's waste no time and just get into it. Number 1, bad source. If you are recording real-time audio, in other words, we're not talking like MIDI, but recording with a microphone or direct in like guitar, then you need to be aware at all times about how that audio is actually being recorded. Because once you record something into your DAW, it is permanent. There's no going back. So once you record a vocal into your DAW, whatever the settings were in your interface or preamp is going to be printed down. In other words, what's done is done, and if you're tracking poor source, then you are starting by shooting yourself in the foot. Let's not shoot ourselves in the foot. That just doesn't sound fun. The biggest mistake I see among beginners and amateur producers is tracking way too hot, too loud. If you are recording audio that is clipping, in other words, going above 0 dB, that is a problem. Now, while hitting 0 dB doesn't actually cause distortion, once you go to process that audio, it's going to be very difficult to process it without running into issues. I'm not saying it's impossible, but why would you want to create problems before you even start? It's just not a good idea. So when you're recording anything, you should be aiming to stay below -6 dB, and that is with your fader at 0. So when you have a track ready to record, have your fader at 0 and make sure that the gain coming in is not exceeding -6 dB at the loudest point. And if you're going above that -6 dB threshold, then you need to dial your gain down, whether through your interface or your preamp if you're using hardware. Tracking great source should just be expected and is one of the most fundamental elements of producing pro quality music. So never record too hot. It is almost always better to record too soft than too hot, because you can always bring it up later on, but it's much harder to bring it down. Number 2, average or poor performances. It really kind of blows my mind how often I hear examples of production where the quality of the recording is pretty good, things are meshing well in terms of arrangement and mix, but the performances are not good. This should also be a basic expectation. And there is a reason pro producers labor intensely over performances. If you track a bad performance, like tracking source too hot, it is permanent. And while I know you might be saying, but Nathan, I can edit it in post, or, but that's what auto-tune is for. No. I mean, yes, you can edit in post, and yes, auto-tune and other pitch correcting plugins are great, but, and this is a huge but, those tools are not designed to fix a bad performance. I use Auto-Tune Pro and I edit all my material, but I will not do that with bad performances. If the performance is shaky, I do it again. Something to keep in mind when it comes to vocals is that pitch is a very small factor in what makes a great vocal performance. I would rather work with a pitchy vocal performance that is sung with incredible soul, great expression, and great dynamics than working with a lifeless performance that is perfectly in pitch. And I'm also not advocating for intentionally singing out of pitch, just for those who are going to maybe take me to the extreme on that. Contrary to popular belief, pitch is very easy to fix, and modern tools today make pitch correction almost 100% natural sounding if you know what you're doing. And if you are one of those anti-pitch correction people, you can have your opinion, but I have never once gotten a critique about me overcorrecting vocals, and most have no clue I'm even using pitch correction because I know how to use it well and I know when I'm working with a great performance or not. So whether it's guitar, vocals, or drums, get a solid performance. Timing is key. You need to practice and record with a metronome, and for those who are going to be whining about that, get over it, because I don't know any pro producers who don't require their musicians to track with a click. So do it. This is, again, fundamental recording practices. That's number 2. Get your performances dialed in and stop settling for crappy performances. Number 3, sound selection. Oh boy. So this one is a bit tougher to talk about, but music is sound. So if the sounds you are using suck, I hear so many productions where the sound choices are just horrible. Like it's obvious that you just pulled up the most stock sounding drums and stock sounding piano and stock sounding basically anything and said, hey, that'll get the job done. Pros do not do this. Pro producers labor on their sound selection. Now, that doesn't mean they spend necessarily a ton of time on it, because pros also have a trained ear as to what sounds are great and what are not. So they can do this very fast. Like, I don't spend a lot of time on sound selection because I've been doing this for well over a decade, and I know what works and what doesn't. So if you're struggling with sound selection, first off, I do think this needs to be one of the first investments a producer makes. Get great sound libraries. I personally believe this is almost a must. And if you know anything about me, you know that I'm not one of those buy a ton of gear guys. You need all this stuff to produce great music. So, you know, I don't want to say that you cannot get great sounds with your DAW stock sounds. I mean, heck, Logic Pro has some pretty decent stock sounds. I mean, I literally did a video on that and it turned out great, but most are not going to be able to accomplish that very easily. And if you have access to amazing sounds, it really just makes life so much easier. So my personal recommendation is the Native Instruments bundles. They have a few options like different size bundles. I think the Komplete Ultimate is incredible. It was the very first big investment I ever made when I was 19 years old, back when it was like version 8 or 9, and we're now on like 13 or something. I'll link those bundles down below, but I seriously think Native Instruments has almost everything you could possibly need, from pianos to synths to drums to bass to, I mean, just everything. No joke, 90% of all sounds I use in my productions to this day are from Native Instruments. I talk about them a lot because I literally just use their stuff every single day, and I'm a believer in their products, and I'm happy to have a relationship with them because I just love them. Splice and Arcade are also good options, but you're just not going to have as much access to the wide range of sounds as you would with the Native Instruments stuff. But I understand that those are obviously more affordable. Once you have access to great sounds, you need to start training your ear. And the best way to do this is what is called active listening. This is the practice of listening to music with what I call a detective ears, and really pay attention to the sounds in your favorite tracks and analyze why they sound the way they do, and then work on replicating those sounds on your own. Learning how to copy sounds is the best way to train your ear quickly. I'm not saying plagiarize, I'm saying study and learn and analyze and implement. This is a common practice, not just used in production, but in virtually every art form. Number 4, trying to fix what's not broken. Now, hear me out. What I mean by this is that so many amateur producers start processing tracks and applying EQ and compression and saturation and this and that because they saw some producer on SoulState talking about it and showing how they have 20 plugins on one track. But let me just show you one of my own tracks so you can see how many plugins I use per track and how many tracks actually have zero processing happen. As you can see, my vocals have a fair amount of processing. Not 20 plugins, more like 5 to 7 on the individual track, and there's some on the bus as well. But look at how many tracks I have that only have 1 or even 0 plugins at all. And yes, this is a track that's on Spotify and all platforms as an official release. That's because I'm not going to try to fix something that isn't broken. And so many problems happen when you start processing the life out of something because that's what everyone else does. No. It's not. When you see the big names on SoulState or really anywhere else showing how they process things, they know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly why they are doing it, and they have a very specific sound in mind they are working to accomplish. And usually they aren't showing you the rest of the track where things are going totally unprocessed. So if you're slapping things on because that's what the big names do, you're probably actually missing the point. You're actually making choices without knowing what it is you are even doing. And you're probably also not realizing the consequences of improperly processing something. I'm not saying that there are never productions I work on that don't have plugins on every track, but it's actually pretty rare. Everything doesn't need extreme EQing, everything doesn't need a high pass filter on it, everything doesn't need extreme compression. Unfortunately, so many of the other YouTube production channels show you their settings and plugins and all that stuff without ever talking about how to trust your ear, what you should be listening for, without ever talking about why they are doing it, without ever sharing the idea behind it. So a ton of young and aspiring producers see that and just copy it, thinking that that is the magic button. But it isn't. It isn't. You should be processing things with purposeful intent. You should be learning why you are doing what you are doing, and you should be training your ear to hear what actually needs to be adjusted and what is already sounding good. Train your ear to have the discipline to look at a track and say, you know what? That sounds great already. I don't need to do anything with that. Especially if you've done your job well as a producer, assuming you're producing your own stuff like myself, you won't need to process every single thing. If it's already sounding good, don't touch it. Leave it alone. Number 5, not clicking the like button on this video. Wait. Number 5, 2 words, copy, paste. This one kind of drives me nuts. So you're wondering why people don't listen all the way through your song. Maybe it's because you copy pasted 75% of the song. Okay, so first off, I do copy paste in my productions, but, and this is again, a huge but, it's only structural stuff, and I am actively working on making every section different after I copy paste. And that right there is the key. You should be working on answering one question throughout the time you are producing, and that is, how is this moment different than the last? If you want people to be invested in hearing your whole song, then you need to be doing things that keep them interested. And copy paste producing is not the answer unless you're producing chill vibes for the study playlist, which there's nothing wrong with. But if you are writing songs with lyrics and want to make music that is artful and well crafted, then you have got to start finding ways to differentiate what you're doing. If you are copy pasting the majority of your stuff in verse 1 and verse 2 are basically the same, why would someone be invested in continuing to listen if they've already heard it? When I'm producing, I am always working on making every single section unique. I want chorus 1 and chorus 2 to not be the same. I will do things, sometimes subtle, to make them different. I want my last chorus to be bigger than the one before it, so there is something keeping the listener hooked. That might be bigger drums, more vocal layers, bigger instrumental, but it isn't accomplished by copy and pasting. Now, when I say I only copy paste structural stuff, I'm talking about the core of the drums, maybe the piano part, but sometimes not, and the things that I know that are fundamental and foundational to the track that really don't need to change moment to moment. And then I immediately start working on making it different. So basically, I copy paste the core, and then I build everything else up completely from scratch. In my Course Producer Accelerator, I listen to my students' tracks every single week in our Feedback Friday live stream, and I've given the same feedback so many times that a production is just not going anywhere. In other words, things are just copy pasted. If I scrub to, almost any section in the song, it sounds exactly like the moment I was listening to before, or even 30 seconds ago, or even a minute ago. That right there should not be something you strive for. You should be actively working to avoid that. You should be actively looking at differentiating moment to moment. What new thing can you add? What new sound, new melody, new drum part, new cool vocal effect? Maybe leave drums out of one section and bring them back in the next so it feels new. Maybe dynamically adjust one section so the next one after that is maybe small and intimate, and then the following one is this huge and powerful moment. There are, a million ways to make your songs and productions more interesting, and copy pasting is not the answer. And if you want to check out the course that I just mentioned, it's in my description or somewhere here on the screen. And if you want some more pro producer tips, you should watch this playlist right here. See you soon.